So, a special thanks to the Theosophical Society in Seattle for this platform on Zoom, and to Josh Anderson for his continued enthusiasm and support for my work. So, Josh gave you quite an introduction of me, but I will add that my special project in art history in graduate school was a study of the meaning and symbolism of the Virgin Mary's sacred garden in early Renaissance art. And that really drew me in more deeply to sacred art, and I think the subject of the rose is, of course, very, very connected to that. So, with that, let's launch ourselves. Let's see. My uh, I think I need my technical assistant if this doesn't work. Oh, there we go. It's just a little slow. So, I have lots of images to share with you this afternoon. Mostly they're paintings, but there are some photos. We're going to first look at the nature of the rose, and then we'll go on to explore the origins of its meaning in the ancient world, the Mediterranean, and from there we'll go on to look at rose symbolism in Islam and its mystical branch, Sufism. And lastly, we'll look at how the rose appears in the Christian tradition, from poetic ideas to art and ritual. And along the way, we're going to come across some saints' legends and devotional practices, also some miracle stories that are a lot of fun. Um, I think as we progress, you'll see there's really a wonderful tapestry of meaning that's arisen around the rose, and it's created by these many different threads from various traditions. As much as possible on the slides that do feature art, I've noted the artwork's title and the artist's name and the year of the image's creation, and I do hope you find that helpful. Now, we'll start with a quick overview of contemporary notions about roses, and that might take you right away to the conclusion that they're all about sentimentality. They're part of a genteel world, a sweet world belonging to romance and affection, Valentines and Victorian hearts and flowers. And that's all true, but the rose and its meaning goes much deeper and culturally wider than that. So, what I'm offering today is a sampling of images and ideas in service of a deeper look at the rose, not only the physical form of the flower, but also its cultural, poetic, religious associations. There's a vast amount of material on the rose. So, again, it's a sampling, but I think it really will give you a wonderful a notion of how you can connect to it personally. Um, what's below the surface, I think, is really so fascinating and compelling. So I hope you'll begin to see how the rose offers a marvelous image for meditation and spiritual contemplation, one that attracts with its perennial beauty. So, whenever exploring a symbol, it's always important to understand the object on its own terms first, because that's how we experience it before any cultural overlays of meaning are applied to it. So, as we start, let's reflect on the nature of rose blossoms. Even with your eyes open, one of the first things you may notice about a rose is its scent. Sniffing a rose is a rich and rewarding experience. One rose can equal a full bouquet of subtle scents. Researchers have found that the scent of a damask rose used to create rose oil for perfume can consist of hundreds of separate components. Of course, the scent of roses depends on their variety. So, given that, the perfume may be powdery or musky, fresh and green, sweet, spicy, fruity, sometimes even with hints of honey, tea, or citrus. You know, a great way to experience the scent of fresh roses is to visit a rose garden. There's a very famous one in Portland, Oregon, and there's one here in Seattle's Woodland Park, which contains 200 varieties of roses. Roses are perennial plants, which mean they grow and bloom year after year from the same root systems, and they can be very long-lived because of that. There's a well-known rose bush that grows along Hildesheim Cathedral in Germany. They call it the thousand-year rose. It's actually over 700 years old. Um, they can be very tough plants. And these roses come in many different colors. You'll find them in red and white blossoms, pink to salmon, orange, violet, and purple, even green. So there's a wonderful variety. Additionally, as the rose flower matures and opens, its color can go through fascinating shifts. So you often see a gradation of color from the outside petals to the inside petals, as in this slide here, where you have pink on the outside and this salmon in the inside. Add to that the fact that their petals are velvety and tender, almost resembling skin. Now, the rose blossom emerges from a small, compact bud like a magic trick. The petals wait, tightly compressed until the right moment, and when they open, the cells that make up the petals may expand 20 to 50 times their initial length, symmetrically opening from a very mysterious, unseen center. The fleshiness of the cells in their petals capture the light, and that in turn adds a vibrance and a glow to their color. The expansion enables the petals to curve and assume one of the flower's many cup-like shapes. There's one more remarkable thing about roses. Energetically, some researchers believe roses have the highest frequency of any plant. Um, that frequency, 320 megahertz, is a frequency associated with harmony, love, healing, and connection with the heart, which may be another of many reasons why the rose is considered by many to be a sacred flower. As for those romantic associations I mentioned earlier, as a spring and early summer flower, roses are frequently associated with beginnings because they bloom at the beginning of our yearly cycle. And we often see roses included in portraits of young women. That's because roses can be emblematic of the innocence and the vitality of youth. Even more importantly, their grace and delicacy is considered feminine. Part of the rose's long-standing association with the feminine, which we'll explore further, may be due to its cup-like form and the petals that surround and give access to its mysterious center. There's a kind of feminine, womb-like space contained within a mothering place of warmth and nurturing. The delicate petals complement the intimacy that belongs to the realm of love. Now, the fleshy, tender perfection of the rose's bloom is a wonderful complement to the matters of the heart. And roses are frequently given as gifts, conveying sentiments of love and appreciation. They are the preeminent floral gift when it comes to expressing and honoring romance and courtship, wedding anniversaries, and of course, Valentine's Day, all occasions that celebrate love. Medieval troubadours who developed the tradition of courtly love in 12th century France knew what they were doing when they compared the beloved to a rose in their songs. The truth is, we can't seem to get enough of the rose, a fact that's illustrated by the Italian painter who you see here. Can I pronounce his name? Gioacchino Passini, who specializes in creating large-scale detailed paintings of rose blossoms. And you're seeing one of his works behind him, life-sized. Like Passini, we're going to go deeper and immerse ourselves in the rose, an incredibly rich subject. There isn't enough time today for a comprehensive study, but we will look at a number of periods of history, cultures, religions. I really hope it's a meaningful array. Let's just summarize where we are so far. Our common contemporary understanding of roses, their fragrance and beauty attracts and exalts our senses. Their tenderness speaks to our hearts and complements the experience of love. And they have a special relationship with the feminine. As our discussion shifts into the symbolic meaning of the rose in other times and places, you'll start to see the resonance between cultures. And I think that that kind of array of connected meanings can make life and the study of art history so interesting. Roses are known to have appeared about 35 million years ago. They're a very old plant. Cultivated roses, largely traced to Chinese ancestry, have been grown for about 5,000 years. The earliest extracts of rose scent, in other words, perfume, date back to Persia around 1000 BCE. Roses were celebrated by the ancient Persians, Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans, and were a prominent ingredient in early unguents and skincare preparations. The Persians led the way in preserving the rose's unsurpassed fragrance, exporting their perfumed ointments throughout the Near East. So now let's turn to the ancient Mediterranean. All the attributes of the rose that we notice and appreciate today, color, lovely petals, charming form, memorable scent, all of this was, of course, noticed and appreciated by the ancients. And they too associated the rose with notions of beauty and the feminine. It's said that Sappho, in her 6th century BC Ode to the Rose, was the first to refer to the rose as the queen of flowers. She lived on the island of Lesbos and was a leader of a community of young women devoted to Aphrodite. And we're going to hear more about this goddess in a minute. The ancient Roman interest in roses was extremely rich and undoubtedly influenced other Mediterranean cultures. For the Romans, roses represented beauty, spring, new life, and love. And they created festivals in which the rose played an important part. Both men and women wore wreaths and garlands of flowers and greenery. The roses marked the wearers as celebrants and served to express the beauty of life itself. But roses for the Romans also held funerary associations, having to do with memory and death, as well as rejuvenation and rebirth. Life and death were considered by the Romans to be two aspects of the same endless, mysterious process. One of the most important Roman festivals, Rosalia, which was primarily held in May, honored and memorialized the beloved dead. In Roman mythology, the god of desire was Cupid, Venus's son. And you see here in this mural from Pompeii, you see Cupid actually three times over on the left. He's stringing rose garlands for use at Roman festivals and rituals. And the spiritual importance of Cupid's work is underlined by the presence on the far right of Psyche. She's the personification of the soul and Cupid's beloved. So these gods representing heart and soul, preparing roses for ritual use, shows how important roses were in Roman culture. Part of the Roman festival of Rosalia involved the religious devotional practice of rosatio, which involved placing flowers as offerings at graves and shrines. Flowers could be put in front of a cult statue of a deity or before other revered objects. So here we see a priestess leaving a bouquet of roses as an offering for Venus, the Roman goddess, embodiment of sublime love, beauty, gardens, and equivalent to the Greek goddess Aphrodite. Roses were also planted by the Romans at some tombs and mausoleums. Now, here is Botticelli's famous painting of the birth of Venus, and she's shown coming into the world atop a scallop shell, which is a symbol of purity and rebirth that express her divine origin. It's said that Venus was born of sea spray blown to shore by the winds, who you see there's Zephyr and another character on the right blowing towards Venus. And as they blow, the scent of the roses is said to have spread over the land. And the legend is that wherever the sea foam fell to the ground, rose bushes grew. Look carefully at the painting and you'll see that pink roses tumble through the air, accompanying Venus's arrival. Another Roman deity closely associated with roses is Flora. She's the goddess of flowers, spring, and fertility. And she was also connected to love, beauty, and abundance. During the Floralia, which was a festival celebrating flora and symbolizing the renewal of the cycle of life, people decorated their homes and themselves with flowers, and they wore colorful clothing in imitation of the flowers of spring. I love that idea, to dress as flowers. It was a kind of May Day. Actually, it was held somewhere between April 28th and May 3rd. A May Day in which the Romans honored flora to ensure blessings on their land and their crops. As I said, the Romans commemorated their dead through private religious practice of rose adornment, which involved placing roses at burial sites, offering roses to the spirits of the dead. It was a way to remember and honor the dead in a positive manner, one that gave solace to the mourners and affirmed life itself. That in itself was considered a form of immortality. The remembering and connecting with beauty was a form of immortality. You know, the Roman army had festivals in which they adorned military standards with rose garlands. Now, red was the preferred color of flower for those battlefield commemorations because the color, of course, brings to mind the color of blood, the blood that's spilt on the battlefield, the blood that keeps us alive. This is all in keeping with the Roman poet Ovid's praise of Flora when speaking of sacrifice and rebirth. He said that Flora generates flowers from the blood of the dead. And just a fun little footnote here. I had mentioned Rosalia, this uh, period in May, and because of that timing, the Romans considered May an unpropitious month for weddings. And so the postponed weddings occurred the following month, and that's what contributed to the popularity of June as a bridal month. Sort of fun. Now, rose cultivation in Egypt has a long history. Roses thrived along the banks of the Nile, and in time they eventually eclipsed the presence of the lotus, which is, of course, Egypt's official flower. Late in ancient Egypt's history, I should say, in the first and second centuries CE, Egypt was a province of Rome. And during that period, Egyptian mummies often featured a painted portrait of the person contained within. These funerary portraits, three examples here on the screen, represent an interesting combination of the Roman naturalistic portrait painting tradition with they combined with the Egyptian practice of mummification. So this portrait would be laid over the corpse's head and shoulders and remained visible while rest of the body was wrapped. Notice that you see here and in many of these memorial mummy portraits, the deceased's hold flower wreaths made of roses. Sometimes the deceased wearing, sometimes the deceased wore rose garlands on their heads. Um, they weren't just holding them, the garland is shown there on the head. As you can see in these are three-dimensional Egyptian funerary portraits attached to the mummy in the same way. They're made of mottled stucco and then painted. Now, these two ladies were determined to be favorably judged by the gods. They wear rose wreaths as the Egyptian crown of justification, representing the righteousness of their soul. The roses were a testament to their soul's value and worth, and that's because the rose was the most revered flower in Romanized Egypt and sacred to the great goddess Isis. So we'll add her to our pantheon of goddesses connected to the rose. And of course, when it comes to mummification, attar of roses was used for mummification as part of mummification in the later Egyptian period. So um, now I'd like to turn to Islam and the place of the rose in Muslim culture. Roses are loved in the Islamic world. In a hot and arid region, it's understandable how beautiful flowers like the rose become signifiers of special blessings. Flowers in general invoke Muslim ideas of spiritual paradise in earthly terms. Gardens are mentioned more than 130 times in the Muslim holy book, the Quran, which is about the length of the New Testament. In the Middle East, the rose is associated also with romantic love, a common motif in art, poetry, and culture throughout the Persian world. One that's very popular in visual art from the 17th to the 19th century is the rose and the nightingale, this pairing of the two. And the theme shows up often in Persian decorative arts, as you see here. This is the cover, it's a hinged cover of an 18th century portable mirror. The rose stands for sublime feminine beauty. The nightingale symbolizes the male admirer, and together they are a symbol of love. Well, it gets more interesting. Now, this is actually a spiritual painting, and what we have is a Muslim mystic, a Sufi, living as a hermit, sitting on his tiger skin. And the turban Sufi is looking toward the nightingale and pink roses. And so, if the rose and nightingale are all about romance, what kind of romance would be of interest to this hermit? The answer is found within Persian poetry, especially that of Rumi and Hafez, where the desire for deep connection with the divine finds profound expression in the yearnings of the human soul, the nightingale, for love and union with God, the rose. The rose represents the sublime, beautiful, the perfect beloved. And the nightingale who sings endlessly of longing and devotion is the lover of beauty. So, this is the deeper meaning of the pairing of the rose and the nightingale. It's a metaphor of the yearning of the human soul, the nightingale, for love and union with God, the rose. And that's why the rose and nightingale are on the cover of this Quran, the holy book of Islam. The rose represents all the wholeness, beauty, and goodness of the divine, and its fragrance represents the path toward enlightenment, which can guide the spiritual seeker on their journey towards the divine. Sometimes rose and nightingale images show the rose plant having thorns, which are interpreted to mean challenges on the spiritual path. Since the rose is often linked to spiritual love and mystical experience, it not only appears in poetry and visual art, but is also found planted in sacred places. Rose hedges sometimes define the sacred precinct of mosques, Muslim places of worship, like this one in Istanbul. The roses represent spiritual love, purity, grace, and create a physical representation of the sacred space of a paradise garden. Images of roses can be found as decorative motifs in mosques, often in tiled murals like this on the left. Now, notice the yellow vertical panel on the far left, and you'll see the birds, nightingales, perching among trailing stems of roses. And in the central panel, roses emerge from a yellow vase. Muhammad said, God is beautiful and he loves beauty. Embellishments like this stand as manifestations of that concept, manifestations of the divine, its grace, and its beauty. And they mark entrance into spiritual paradise. So it's very, very fitting that this tiled decorative mural should be at the entrance to a mosque. Sometimes images of roses are even found on the ceilings of mosques, like this one in Shiraz, which is a Persian city renowned for its roses. If you look carefully, I think it's probably easier in the image on the right. Uh, uh, you'll see that the ceiling, it's covered with terracotta tiles, and there's thousands of images of roses. They form a huge circular rose mandala. It's like a vision of paradise, a sacred garden that awaits the faithful. Roses in the form of rose petals are often found in sacred Islamic places like Sufi shrines. This one is in North India. Now, such shrines are places of reverence, prayer, devotions, and chanting. Outside the shrines are vendors selling rose petals by the basketful. And you can imagine how fragrant the roses are when you enter this sort of precinct. The shrines are burial places of highly revered spiritual guides and saints. They're sacred places, they're sacred portals, spiritual portals where you can connect, invoking the saint and asking for intercession and blessing. The faithful Sufi pilgrims who aspire to nearness to God by way of direct personal experience, they will purchase the rose petals to carry into the saint's shrine as offerings. Beauty is very important to Sufis, and so the offerings must be beautiful. And here's a scene from inside a shrine. It's the burial place of a medieval Sufi saint who stressed love as the path to God. And the saint's tomb, which you see in the foreground there, is piled high with cloth coverings. Some of the cloth is decorated with verses from the Quran. Others are printed. If you look carefully at that green one, for example, it's printed with rose images. And on each layer of cloth are rose petals that have been offered by circling devotees, given as an act of reverence. Can you imagine the energy in a place like this? The grave is believed to be imbued with blessing energy that can be absorbed by people and objects. So people will touch the grave and they will take a rose petal from it. They might consume the petal or use it for healing or take it home for protection. So it's powerful. Islamic artists face a special challenge when creating sacred art because of the Islamic prohibition against representing the human figure. To portray human figures is felt to be courting idolatry, and this prohibition has pretty much held throughout the Muslim world for centuries. Muhammad is associated with roses above all flowers, having revered and kissed them when he encountered them. There's many stories about Muhammad and roses. And so the rose, not a human figure, but the rose has come to serve as a symbol, a visual device representing Muhammad himself and the spiritual beauty of his presence. And it symbolizes the prophet's peaceful teachings, compassion, and mercy. That kind of symbolism explains why there are illuminations of a large rose that can be found at the opening of the Quran, Islam's most holy book. Now, remember, traditionally Qurans open from right to left because they're written in Arabic, which reads right to left. So we're looking at the opening of the book, even though, in the West, this would be the back. The rose, this particular rose in this position, is called the Rose of Muhammad, and it precedes and faces the opening passage where there are prayers for guidance and mercy. It's a very honoring placement for a very special image. The first point of encountering the divine in this holy book. Now you can see there's Arabic written atop the image of the rose on the right. It's a description of Muhammad's physical appearance. The description was originally composed at Muhammad's request so that his followers would know what he looked like after he passed and in the years to come. And the rosebuds below the large rose contain the names of Muhammad's descendants and disciples. So the rose plant serves as a kind of spiritual family tree in this particular example. Here are two more Islamic illuminations drawn from manuscripts that describe Muhammad's appearance and character. These kinds of books were pretty common, and they were considered to have protective powers like an amulet. On the left, notice how large the rose is in comparison to the vase. That speaks to the importance of the rose. Muhammad's characteristics are written in gold among the rose's pink petals, while the names of the rightly guided caliphs are included on the green leaves that burst forth from its stem. And in the Arabic above, written in blue, reads, "This is what the nightingale sings above the rose." In other words, Muhammad's praises. Turning to the image on the right, let's take a look at the two big roses at the top. Now, the left-hand rose, it has the 99 names of Muhammad, founder of Islam. Names like the Awakener, the Guide, the Messenger of God. So each petal contains a different name. And on the right, we have the names of Muhammad on the left, and on the right are the 99 names of God, Allah, such as the merciful, the compassionate, the one, the indivisible. And again, each name is written on its own petal. So altogether, these petals form a kind of litany, calling out the poetic names and virtues of these revered beings. And as we leave the Muslim world, here's one last image with its own special connection to the rose. That black cubic form, that structure in the center, is the Kaaba, located at the center of Islam's most important mosque. That black form is considered the house of God by Muslims, who face towards it when offering prayers, no matter where they are in the world. All adult Muslims are expected to visit it in pilgrimage at least once in their lifetime, circling it 7 times, touching the outside ideally once on every circuit, but never entering its most holy and sacrosanct interior. This interior of the Kaaba is ceremonially washed once a year. And with what do they cleanse the white marble walls? Rose perfume of the finest quality. It signals the presence of the divine, profound beauty, and the scent that Muhammad identified as that of his own self. He had a really intense connection with the rose. So I've gone through a lot of material. I have more, but I'm thinking maybe now is a good time to take a break. How does that sound?
That sounds
Um,
lovely. Let's take 5 minutes.
yeah, I'm a little bit ahead of myself, so can we call it 7?
Yes, 7 minutes, friends. So we'll come back and pick this back up at 4:50
Yes,
p.m. Pacific
excellent.
time.
Great.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Summer sun. We questioned the fragrance, which seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. As we opened the door to the nave, the fragrance became even more powerful, but not overbearing. It was like it was inside you so that you felt it. The experience was especially strange because both of the men had colds, which left them congested and unable to smell much. They turned on the lights and searched for the source of the fragrance, which they did find was emanating from an icon, a religious painting of Saint Nicholas, which you see here on the right. They're holding that same image, same object. That icon, which was mechanically printed, it wasn't even hand painted icon, it was just like a magazine page printed and then sealed under a rigid plastic laminate. It was found to be miraculously exuding glistening streams of holy oil known as myrrh in the Eastern Church. Now, many miracles have been attributed to this holy rose scented oil. They collect it using cotton balls, and then they distribute the cotton balls to people. And the icon itself travels around the United States, still exuding myrrh. Um, Now, there are many miraculous healings credited to that rose scented oil, including cancer cures, alcoholism, any number of things. And I want to emphasize this is not actually a unique story. There are a number of miraculous myrrh streaming icons known in the Eastern Church that have um, come to light in, let's say, the last 50 years, and probably before that, but certainly it's happening. In Catholicism, in Western Christianity, there are a number of saints' legends that involve what are called the miracle of the roses. One of the earliest of those legends involves Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, a 13th century queen, and you see a statue of her on the right there. She was a princess who, when she learned of the compassionate ideals of Saint Francis of Assisi, devoted herself to works of charity, aiding the unfortunate. So she would secretly take food from her household to distribute to the poor in the village, which was against the wishes of her family. And as the story goes, on her way, she unexpectedly met her husband, who asked what was hidden in her cloak. And so she opened it, and unexpectedly, rather than incriminating loaves of bread, fresh, fragrant roses tumbled out. The miraculous abundance of roses in midwinter confounded him, and she was left to go on her way. It's a beautiful story of the triumph of love and charity and compassion. And now on the left, you see a tiled image of St. Isabella Portugal. I'm not going to take the time to recount her story, but it's very similar to that of Elizabeth of Hungary. In both cases, rather than being punished, the women experienced divine assistance and favor in the course of performing charity, and there was a miraculous appearance of roses. There's some other saints with parallel stories too, including a male saint known as San Diego de Alcala, a lay Franciscan brother who lived in 15th century Spain. Very similar story. Roses also play a part in the story of the 19th century Carmelite nun, Saint Therese of Lisieux. Therese deeply believed in simplicity, and she had a child's faith and trust in God's love. Unfortunately, she died young of tuberculosis at the age of 24. Now, this was in the 19th century, so we actually have photographs of her. It's kind of fun to have photographs of a saint. In her writings, she often used flowers and roses as metaphors to refer to herself or to the acts of love that she aspired to. Novices of her convent reported that Therese said, "After my death, I will let fall a shower of roses," with the idea that roses being the symbols of the graces and blessings that she would send to earth when she was in heaven. And so that's how Therese has come to be so frequently portrayed with roses, which for her represented spiritual love. So here she is. This is actually a mural in a church in Rome. But in the image, she's surrounded by angels, shown in her heavenly glory, releasing cascades of roses. It's a painting's an invitation into a meditation on the grace and beauty of the divine as delivered through the pure heart of Saint Therese. Before we leave this segment on the Roman Catholic tradition, I wanted to share with you a really interesting liturgical practice connected to roses. It resembles the shower of rose blessings that we've been looking at, for example, with Therese. This and the next photo were taken in the Pantheon, an ancient domed temple that still stands in Rome. 1,400 years ago, this Roman temple was made into a Catholic church dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And in the center of the building's enormous domed ceiling, we're looking up in this photograph at the ceiling, in the center is an oculus, which is a circular opening to the sky. There's a similar feature at St. James Cathedral in Seattle, if you've ever been in there. And this oculus lets in light in what would otherwise be a pretty dark space. The Pantheon oculus is almost 200 feet up. So you can think of it as a kind of a symbolic eye of heaven. And ever since the temple was Christianized around 600 CE, a special ceremony is performed there, and it involves the firefighters of Rome climbing the outside of the building to the top and letting bushels of red rose petals fall through the open circular aperture through the oculus. And the falling red rose petals symbolically offer the opportunity of being touched by the divine as were the original Christian apostles. This ritual is a conflation of the Christian feast day of the Pentecost, celebrating the descent of the Holy Spirit, with the Roman festival of Rosalia. Um, Pentecost is when the apostles were transformatively empowered to manifest spiritual gifts. Um, this rose petal ritual is actually found throughout Europe, but especially in Italy. When we started this exploration, I spoke about the rose as a symbol of love given between people. After looking at Islam and Christianity, it's clear that the rose is connected with love in many ways, including the relationship between the divine and the individual. As I prepared this program, I was struck by how many contemporary examples there are of the rose shown superimposed upon images of the divine feminine. And this is, I'm talking about art of the last 50 years. As we've seen the divine feminine all the way through this presentation, from Venus and Flora and Isis to Mary, the Catholic saints, there's this natural relationship with the rose. And you see it clearly in the image on the left where Mary reveals a rose hovering over her heart, radiating gentle, open-hearted love. This is the love of understanding and compassion. It's so nourishing, it's so needed because it's hard to be human. We need that love. And on the right is a painting by a Seattleite, Robin Maynard Dobbs, who makes this painting makes for an interesting pairing actually with Botticelli's Birth of Venus. Now, look closely and you'll see 7 petals floating down from the rose, and they hold tiny little figures depicted at different stages of the life cycle. The red petals bring to mind the Roman use of the rose to celebrate both life and death, renewal, and the cycle of life and rebirth. Like the rose petals floating down through the pantheon, these petals offer a wonderful metaphor of the opportunities we're given in each stage of life, opportunities to live into the beauty of the rose, the beauty of spirituality, even if life is difficult. In Dante's famous 3-volume work, The Divine Comedy, he chronicles an epic spiritual journey that takes him from hell to purgatory and finally to paradise. In paradise, he becomes enveloped at the end of this incredible journey. He becomes enveloped in a brilliant light that at first blinds him, but then renders him fit to see God. And that's when Dante sees the scene illustrated here, an immense white rose blooming in response to the divine light of God. And the Virgin Mary, seen in the far center, top rank there, she is the queen of the celestial rose, and on the petals, each petal, are enthroned souls of the blessed. Each saint sits on a different petal, and each petal is equally linked to the central stem that nourishes it, that stem being divine source. And angels fly around the gigantic white rose like bees, distributing peace and love. It's a stunning vision of union with the divine. Dante's choice of the rose as a symbol for paradise makes so much sense, especially given its circular shape. In sacred art, the circle, which has no beginning and no end, represents wholeness, peace, perfection, divine love, oneness, the infinite, and eternity. When you add the three-dimensionality of the rose to that equation, you get a magnificent, ever-expanding center, a kind of Russian nesting doll full of blessings and love. From its mystic center, the rose offers a natural connection to the divine, a way to connect with a higher vibration. I hope at this point you'll agree with me that the rose blossom is as important to the West as the lotus is to Asia. If you believe in oneness and the idea that we all have an intrinsic connection to the divine, then I suggest to you that each of us carries within us a beautiful rose, a mystic rose, and it is our heart. And that heart is the pathway to the soul. The rose offers an image representing the way to elevate our consciousness, stay connected, live into the light, and remember that we are part of the larger one. So I encourage you to build a relationship with the rose. There's so many different ways you could do this. Seek it out in nature, bring roses into your home and garden, place a image of a rose, even if it's artificial, on your home altar or places you feel sacred. I led a workshop once where we inscribed things onto the various petals of a drawn rose. So that's, we looked at that in terms of Muhammad and the illuminations of the rose. You can hold the image in your mind while meditating. Honor your heart. Keep your heart open. Allow the rose, the mystic rose, to thrive within you. Allow the love and beauty it brings into your life. And may the path of the rose and its deep serenity always be yours. And I'll just close my slides with this nice quote from Rumi.